Oh, now the preseason is pretty hectic, eh? Like we're all trying to run around like headless chooks, trying to find out who's broken, what's broken, etc. So in today's video, Coach Eeks, aka The Jizz, is going to let you know all about the 3 new and updated runes or keystones that are on the Rift at the moment, and these are Lethal Tempo, Glacial Augment, and First Strike. And I've done that much research to give you the optimal rune page for 33 champions who can abuse these keystones. So hopefully in the next 10 or so minutes, you will have all the information you need regarding these new runes and the champions you should actually run these on. Now this preseason content not only is uploaded daily, it is also the most extensive out there. So to stay informed for everything for season 12, hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. Now we're going to start by talking about Lethal Tempo, guys. So if you don't already know, Lethal Tempo is giving melee champions 15% attack speed for each time they attack an enemy champion, and this stacks up to 6 times. So at max stacks you get 90% attack speed and also extra range, which sounds kind of nuts, and it is, but for ranged champions they're just getting 5% attack speed, so 30% when it's fully stacked, but they do get an extra 100 range, and on some champions this can be really broken. So let's start with these ranged champions and the rune pages for each of them. So first up we have Ashe, and one of the keys here, obviously Lethal Tempo is important, but what's also really great for Ashe is running approach velocity. This means that each time you auto attack an enemy champion, because you will be slowing them and getting attack speed through Lethal Tempo, you are able more than any other AD carry to actually get to the max stacks and increase your range, which is already really high. So this can be very oppressive, and it can also be very oppressive on the next AD carry, Jinx. But because Jinx doesn't have an innate slow in her auto attacks like Ashe, there's no point in running approach velocity. So a very standard rune page here, and the reason Lethal Tempo works on Jinx is because of your Fishbone's range is very easy to get to 6 stacks, especially in those late game team fights in which you can completely 1v5. Now another AD carry who's really enjoying the new Lethal Tempo, this is Kalista. And even though Kalista's win rate is actually one of the lowest in the game, let me tell you something, in high elo Korea, where the best Kalistas in the world reside, she has close to a 60% win rate with this Lethal Tempo rune. Now the only downside to running Lethal Tempo is that it's not as powerful of Hail of Blades in the first few levels, so that initial all-in won't be as good, but during those extended trades, and because Kalista you'll be auto-attacking a lot, it's pretty much all of your damage, this keystone can be so valuable. And the last AD carry this can be valuable on is Kog'Maw, and lots of Kog'Maw mains weren't that happy with this new Lethal Tempo, because you can't exceed the attack speed cap anymore. But here's the thing, guys, with this new Lethal Tempo on Kog'Maw, it's super easy to proc and actually get to the max stacks, especially in lower elos and even in higher elos where people understand how this new keystone works. Kog'Maw has one of the best win rates for all the AE carries, around 53%. So it might not be as good in the late game as the last Lethal Tempo, but you should be able to hold on to this attack range and actually get to it quickly once you start getting attack speed, and Kog has actually come out of this change to be in a really good position. The stats don't lie. But what about all these champions in the top lane, in the jungle, maybe in the mid lane who can make use of this new Lethal Tempo? Well, let's start with Yasuo and Yone. These two champions, with this rune page on your screen, I mean, you could probably run anything and you're going to do well, but in particular with Lethal Tempo. And this keystone is nuts on these two champions, because when you start stacking it, your Q's cooldown on Yasuo is actually going to decrease the more attack speed you get, and on Yone, same thing with your Q and your W as well. So the more you stack Lethal Tempo by attacking an enemy champion, the lower your cooldowns are going to be, so your DPS is going to go through the roof. And I've also recommended running Bloodline here because, to be honest, you don't really need Alacrity anymore. Tempo is giving you all the attack speed you need, and this is going to give you more sustain and durability in the laning phase and in those team fights. Now another champion enjoying Tempo, this is Gwen in the top lane, and for Gwen it makes total sense as well. Attack speed is a really useful stat because it synergizes with your E, and lots of Gwen players in higher elo are just having success with this setup. Now we can't forget about Jax, obviously with Lethal Tempo giving him attack speed and then range at max stacks. Because he's such a big auto attack champion, this is legit massive. Also remember, your W counts as a stack, so you can stack this super quick once you start getting levels and into the mid late game when you do get Bork and attack speed. So with this page, Jax is for sure one of the strongest champions on the Rift, just like Tryndamere. Like, you've probably seen it already, but a Tryndamere with max stacks and Berserker's Grease and God knows what else he buys Gale Force, he attacks like 10 times in 1 second, I swear. It looks super OP, and it also looks pretty OP on bruisers. So Set and Darius, these two champions work really well with Tempo because of Set's passive and Darius's low W cooldown, which also counts as a stack. So fighting with these two bad boys in the early game probably means you're going to die, and it just adds to their chase potential, the attack range that is. So if you think about a Set running at you with his Q, if you think about a Darius chasing you down with his Ghost, there's really no escaping. And there's also no escaping a Trundle with Lethal Tempo. At level 1, your Q, because it counts as a stack and it reduces your opponent's attack damage. Like, is anyone going to beat a Tempo Trundle at level 1? There's no way. And in your runes, make sure you take Presence of Mind so you do not run out of mana. Now, someone else who's also enjoying Lethal Tempo is Kayle. And for Kayle, it's more risky to run Tempo than on other champions, and the reason being, your early game is pretty weak. weak, and lethal tempo isn't going to do much because you're a melee champion. And who on earth are you actually going to run up to and headbutt on Kayle? Like, you're probably going to lose. So this is really for the late game and to get the extra range. So for sure, this is still a good rune page, but I would take this in a specific situation where you're against a passive laner, so maybe a tank in the top lane, or maybe a high range mid laner who doesn't have the most kill pressure on you, so you can actually scale and get to this spike. Now, one champion who doesn't need to scale as much as Kayle to make use of lethal tempo, this is Kindred in the jungle. And if we think about Kindred for a second, her range isn't the best, so having lethal tempo and the attack speed and then the range this gives you, this is awesome, especially when you're fighting the enemy jungler or ganking a lane. This is almost like getting a Kindred stack. Now, it also works really well with your Q's attack speed, but here's the thing, your Q does not count as a stack, so do not get baited by this. But regardless, Kindred is really enjoying this rune and the preseason at the moment with one of the best win rates in the jungle. And speaking of good win rates in the jungle, well, Nocturne with lethal tempo, like, it makes sense. It's like the perfect rune. 15% attack speed for each auto attack. This is nutty. And once you get to strike break, think about it. When you jump on that enemy carry and you slow them, because they're slowed and they're probably going to get feared, you can easily get to max stacks on lethal tempo and get that extra attack range. And to be honest, I want to give myself credit because I called this. I said lethal tempo Nocturne with Strikebreaker is going to be really good in 11.23, and guess what? He is. So have some fun on Nocturne before they probably nerf lethal tempo for melee champions. Now, just a quick thing here, guys. Lots of people are talking about lethal tempo on Tristana, Quinn, and some other champions, but here's the thing. On these champions, they already have good runes for them. So Tristana with Hail of Blades, Quinn with Press the Attack. So you have to understand the lethal tempo might give you something, but you're going to give up something, and you have to weigh up whether that's worth. Now, let's move on to Glacial Augment, guys, and talk about this keystone. So when you immobilize an enemy champion, so we're talking hard CC, right? So knock up, stuns, roots. So when you apply this to an enemy champion, they are going to emanate 3 glacial rays from themselves, and these rays will actually sprout towards nearby enemy champions and instantly slow them. Now, this is on a 25-second cooldown, so we really have to think about the champions who can make this work, and there are 4 of these legitimate ones. So the first of these is Thresh. Because this is going to work off your Q and your E, it's super easy to proc, and you might think like, well, what about Rel or maybe Leona, Nautilus? But on these champions, guys, you're getting your heads in there. So Aftershock is, to be honest, just a better keystone. But for Thresh, because you don't always have to get in there, you can just land your hook and then flay them. It's almost like you're playing this version of Thresh as a spellcasting support. So landing one death sentence or even just flash flaying into the enemy team, this is going to have more of an impact, and it's also got a super good win rate on Bard. Now, Bard doesn't have as much CC as Thresh, because until level 6, you just have your Q, right? But when you hit level 6, here's the thing, guys, your ultimate actually counts as this immobilization. So when these enemy champions get hit by your ultimate, as soon as they come out of this, they will be slowed by Glacial. And think about Bard as well. Your ultimate is AoE. So if you landed onto 2 or 3 enemy champions, all of them are going to be slowed as soon as they come out of that stasis, and your team can just annihilate them. Now, another support this works really well on is Zyra, because of your root from your E and your knock up from your ultimate. And it's also really nice for Zyra because you are kind of squishy, and once you get jumped on, it's very easy to actually stay onto you. So Glacial, the slow, really comes in handy to keep those enemy champions at plant's length. They're the only non-support guys who can actually make use of Glacial Augment. This is Aatrox. But the bad thing is here that you're giving up the precision tree, so you don't have the fighting stats, and for Aatrox, this is going to be important. But I think the trade-off is actually kind of worth, because it procs off all of your knockups and your ultimate fear, playing this version of Aatrox as a spell casting champion. Even though you probably were before, auto attacks haven't been a massive part of your kit, but now it's even more important to understand your abilities at everything. This is why we're taking 2 adaptive force, so if you can play around your abilities and your knockups, you can actually use this to great effect. Now, moving on to the last keystone, guys, this is First Strike, and when you actually get the first strike, or attack, or ability damage onto the enemy champion, you're going to get an initial 5 gold, and that attack is actually going to do increased damage, as is your damage to enemy champions for the next 3 seconds. So if you think about champions who can use the range in the role they're in, they can really make use of this. So first up, we have Gangplank, and though it might not be the best thing in the early game because you don't get that much damage, so this rune is all about scaling, and because GP scales very well with his passive gold from his parlay as well, this enables you to get your mid and late game item spikes a lot sooner than everyone else and take over games. It's also really nice because if you land your ultimate onto multiple enemy champions, not only is this going to do more damage, but you're also going to get a lot of gold just from pressing R. And the same thing on Jace, not in terms of your ultimate, but because you have range in your kit, it's really easy to abuse melee top laners and scale into a game for pretty much free. But just remember, on these champions, guys, when you don't have first strike, you probably don't want want to be looking for trades. You're really strong when you have this keystone at the ready, so make sure you're paying attention to this above your HUD. And the same thing goes for Nico. Playing around this keystone in the top lane is crucial, but I really like this rune page on Nico because the ultimate hunter decreases that ultimate's cooldown, and your ultimate with first strike, if you can hit multiple enemy champions with this, especially in the mid to late game, you are going to deal an incredible amount of damage, and that means you're going to get an insane amount of gold. Now, there are 280 carries who can actually use this as well, guys, and these are Sivir and Varus. Now, yes, you can use it on center, but to be honest, it's probably better to play this as a support role. So for Sivir and Varus, because you have abilities that have amazing range, so Sivir and Varus's Q, you're really playing around these cooldowns and trying to poke the enemy champions when you have your Q up. Now, it does force you to go for a lethality build, but this is still fine because everything lethality got buffed in 11.23, and because you're such good scalers as well, just like Gameplank and every other champion abusing this rune, this lets you get to the late game spike a lot sooner. Now, heading to the mid lane, guys, there are so many champions who can abuse this rune. So the first of these, Zoe, you have amazing range, and because you're doing more damage for the next 3 seconds when you first strike the enemy champion, this harmonizes really well with your sleepy bubble trouble. So when you land your E onto an enemy champion and first strike procs, bang, in you go with your Q, and you're going to blow them up. Now, it's not quite the same on Orianna and Victor. This is a little different, so really you're just using your poke from your Q for Orianna, for your E from Victor, just to get free gold and scale into a game. Now, same thing for Vel'Koz. Really, you're just using your poke in the laning phase to get that free gold, and exactly the same thing with Xerath and Ziggs as well. But instead of running Scorch like Vel'Koz does, you're going to be running Transcendence. And the last mid laner who can really make use of first strike, guys, this is Kog'Maw. I know it sounds a little weird, but it actually makes sense, right? Because your Void Ooze has such amazing range, and your Living Artillery has some stupid range as well. This can actually be really obnoxious to play against, and you can get a lot of gold and deal a lot of damage just by standing back and using your Void Ooze and your ultimate. Now, the final 2 first strike champions, these are 2 supports, and these are Seraphine and Lux. Seraphine, Lux, they have really good range in the bot lane, so getting the first strike off, you shouldn't be the one taking the first hit, so you're going to get that free gold initially, and then if you land just one ability, whether it's Seraphine's E with her passive, whether it's Lux and her light binding, you have a lot of follow-up damage. So therefore, that's going to do more damage because of first strike, and that's going to mean more gold each time you combo. But once again, guys, you have to pay attention to that first strike cooldown and try to synergize this with your own cooldowns. So these 3 runes are kind of a key factor in defining what the preseason is at the moment. So hopefully this video gave you an insight onto who to use these on. And if you guys have a secret OP champion with one of these setups, let me know in the comment section down below. And if you did enjoy the video, please remember to leave a like down below. And until tomorrow's daily upload, this has been the Jizz.